Hey everyone, welcome to Talk Together. Thank you for joining us for an evening of chatting about Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPGs as well. I'm Chris, I'll be your host tonight, and I'm chatting to Sam, who you can see right here. There he is. Hello Sam, how are you?
Hello Chris, I'm very well. How are you?
Good. We're recording this very early in the morning for me, so coffee will be fine.
The world's always better with coffee, right?
You're a morning person, aren't you? You're one of those terrible people.
Well, I'm not really a person. That's the part of that quote you've got wrong. No, I do like mornings. Although this morning I found myself awake at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was like, it's admin time. So I'm 5.5 hours deep into work.
You're also very young. And this is one of my bugbears, as I'm sure you're aware. We've played together more than enough to know this. I'm in my 30s. I've got kids. I've got a dog. Every hour of sleep is blessed. Anyway, let's not talk about...
I can afford accruing sleep debt. That's it, right? Yeah, eventually commitments come in.
No, my 20s were accruing sleep debt. I know exactly what you mean. I accrued a ton of sleep debt, and now it's all paying back. Anyway, let's talk about D&D. We'll be talking through some lovely questions, some anecdotes, and we're rolling dice to decide what questions we ask before we kick off. The stream runs for about an hour, and we're delighted to be sponsored by Hero Forge, Ultra Pro, Elderwood Academy, and supported by D&D Beyond, Warriors of Waterdeep, and Level Up Dice. We're Roll Together RPG on all social medias. Massive thank you to our D20 Club. Thank you so much for letting us have rambling interviews where I complain about my age. There's a Patreon link in chat, hopefully. And our shows are also available as podcasts. You prefer to listen or catch them on YouTube later. Right, Sam. Now, the way this works is we roll a dice, and then I have questions, a list of questions that I ask you based on the dice that I roll. Do you want to dive in with that? Start off with a question, or would you prefer to talk about something else?
Why not break the ice?
Break the seal.
Why not? It's what we're here for, right? We're not here to just talk. We're here to break them.
Ooh, it's an early contender for contentious. I like that. Number 8. How do you feel about PvP in a TTRPG D&D context?
Ooh.
Oh no.
What are you framing as for PvP? Are you saying actual fighting or contention within the party? Because that's
you and I both DM, so you and I both have visions of how this might fit together. I would say, as a DM, players arguing with players borders on PvP because often there's dice rolls involved. Like if someone goes, I want to roll a deception check against another party member, I would class that as on some level PvP because they are making decisions that are counter to each other. And yes, of course, that can scale all the way up to drawing swords, throwing spells at each other, that sort of thing. I guess it's probably conceptually, how do you feel about the whole thing? Where's that line for you?
So I think what it sort of comes down to is how I see Dungeons and Dragons is kind of the first level of this, and that will frame it. Basically, it's that is Dungeons and Dragons a game, or is Dungeons and Dragons an opportunity to do some fun fantasy improv with a rule set? If it's the former, then by all means PvP to your heart's content, because effectively you're playing a game to win. If it's the latter, PvP immediately goes against the fundamental rule of improv, which is...
Yes, and.
Exactly. And as soon as you're bringing in PvP, you're basically saying, we're breaking the chain and I disagree with you. Now, in a podcast or stream, that can be a problem because you're derailing everything. And in that instance, I think PvP de facto, as in actually fighting someone for an outcome you desperately care about, can be problematic unless it is fundamental to your character. So you are a life domain cleric and the rest of your party are all rogues, and they have decided they're trickster rogues. They've all decided they want to be murder hobos. Now, first of all, why are you in that party in the first place?
Don't play in that game. That's a terrible idea. Unless you are literally there to play the stick in the mud and you enjoy that, which is totally, I don't want to get someone's yum, you could be.
As long as it's okay for everyone else in the party.
Yeah.
Because exactly. Now, yes, if they've decided they want to murder someone, unless you're a life domain cleric who has sort of, you've doffed your pauldrons and you've decided you're going to make a bit of money on the side, resurrecting the dead.
You could certainly argue that you're giving life, but also taking it away.
Yeah.
Sorry, that literally became the line from Jupiter Rising. I agree, life.
Please commission our work, Netflix.
Oh, Eddie Redmayne. Oh, it's your best acting work ever, mate. Screw your Oscar. That's where I loved you. Jupiter Ascending. I want more of that.
So in that instance, I can understand why you'd need to PvP, because your character at a fundamental core level can't go along with what's happening. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at that point I understand, but you should never put your players should never be in that position, because why would they be adventuring together if they're so fundamentally diametrically opposed to one another? Mm-hmm. Now, so that's the kind of combat stuff I take issue with it, sort of. But if it has to happen, if you're actually at that point where your character could not carry on in the party if it goes this way, and your character is inclined to kill someone in order to get their way, cool, whatever, by all means. The other side, rolling, I think depends on the players you have. If your players will sit there and they'll roll and they will acknowledge the outcome of that, and that sets it in stone, brilliant. And then you're not derailing anything. No one's unhappy. You're just progressing from that point. So you have two characters, you have different opinions. Well, which of them is more persuasive? Cool. They've now persuaded their friend to do it. It's you're going out for lunch with your friends. And it's like, where do we go? Well, I want pizza. I want curry. Well, who's going to put together the better case? Mm-hmm. So in that instance, I think PvP's kind of fine. But I don't think it's something you should be pulling out at every single instance. It has to mean something, right? It has to be something your character cares enough about to damage group cohesion.
Would you say contextually then that PvP is, okay, from a combat perspective, not fine? That's something that needs to be discussed and worked through before it becomes the character hits the other character with a dagger. But social PvP is fine as long as it is discussed and safe? Like there's a process for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think at first, you have to be able to role play out discussions that would happen naturally, right? So you've got two people that want different things. Well, you should. The first step is to talk to each other, right? Because that's what you do. That's what people would do. That's what a multi-dimensional character would do, which hopefully your characters are. But after that point, well, if you can't persuade them, then I think the purpose of having the dice there is to be able to mechanically go, okay, well, it's an improv game, but also it's a game. And if we can't sort it out ourselves, well, there's the game rules there to be able to work out actually how effectively we're performing in this thing. Now, I think in an ideal world, you avoid it. You avoid having to roll for anything with regards to kind of social intergroup mingling. Yeah. But I don't take an issue with it, because it's your character's traits, your character's foibles are there written out on paper. Yeah, of course. And it makes sense as kind of a metric for your potential to succeed in something is there. I might be very eloquent as a person, but my character might not be. And therefore I could sit here and persuade another player that we should go to the blacksmith's and we should steal his shoes and run off into the woods. But
classic motorhome.
My character might not be capable of doing that. So yeah, it's a...
Okay, so what you're saying is PvP is not a problem contextually with the system or with the performance, because it's part of the performance. Yeah. I can dig that. Yeah, I feel that. I have a very interesting balance on it personally, because I have some players who absolutely will not do it and really, really hate it, which is totally fair, and therefore those players don't involve them in that. That's totally fine. I, as a storyteller, think part of the joy of D&D is it's a party of, 4, 5, 6 who all pull together, all pull at the same string, but are fundamentally different people. And thus, how do those needs, wants interact with each other? Could it lead to conflict? Like we had a 12-parter that we ran last year called Sea of Swords Forsaken, where one of the characters was a wizard played by Niall, who was very comfortably and very openly power hungry. Like, I want to learn how to be a more powerful wizard. It means I can do more powerful things and help more people. This is, like, not a negative drive, like a very much positive drive. The villain turned out to be a mummified version of him from, well, the past/future, timey-wimey, who had gone too far.
Yeah.
And in the end, I put him in front of, it's a mythical art from Netherese history, but a magical artifact of immense power, and said, there you go. And the final battle was arguably against him. And it was a really interesting, complex narrative where the party were actually basically facing off against their own demons and themselves in many ways. But players played through it. Players really enjoyed it. We had a lovely time. And afterwards, some of them said, I don't want to do that again. I said yes when we started planning it because I thought it would be fun. That potentially at some point there might be PvP, but I don't want to be in a PvP environment. Actually, it's quite tense and quite scary.
Yeah.
And I totally see that. I think that, I mean, again, like anything in D&D, and whenever I come to these conversations, it always comes down to the same thing. Have a session 0. Have safety tools. The ability to go, what do we all want to happen in this game? And the ability as part of the game to go, hang on, stop, I'd like to talk about this before we keep doing it. Incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
You must use safety tools, surely.
Yes, no, totally. And I think the importance of the session 0, I remember my first campaign as a DM, and we started it, and I was so unaware of these things that I didn't run a session 0. Now, obviously, I'm still a child now, so I was but a glint in my father's eye when I ran my first campaign. But
it's impressive. Where'd you find the other players?
Well, we were all hanging about, you know. We had time on our hands. Literally hanging about.
Oh dear. Dear.
We didn't run a session 0, and the issue that came from that was we got kind of 4 sessions in, and I was like, these characters don't make sense in this setting. Why have they gathered together? It logically, it's like these are people who are so fundamentally different from each other, but they're sticking together because the big voice in the sky is telling them to.
Exactly.
Well, at that point, perhaps we could have an interesting pilgrimage, but I was like, let's start this again. Session 0, work out what everyone wants, and you can use the same characters, but we'll just mess around with them a bit so it makes sense for them to be there.
Yeah.
I think on so many levels, it's just important to have that discussion because it's collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
It's the DM story technically, but it's in that the DM is the author, but the DM isn't the characters within the story, or they are. But it's a complicated analogy, and actually, it's a collaborative story. Everyone's writing it. But it's almost like the DM is the author and the players are the pens and pencils and writing tools that the DM will use. And paint, it's like the DM's a painter and the players are the paintbrushes, and they then dictate how that story comes together. That's the nature of the brushstrokes.
It's a very extended metaphor, but it's a better one.
Yes.
I mean, it's a funny thing. Like, I find as a DM, the older I get and the more I DM, the more I lean into, I have a concept. I have an idea of what I might do. I have encounters planned in case we get to them. I have the ability to encounter track very quickly and to move things around thanks to D&D Beyond. Thank God for that. Damn, website's amazing. But the ability to go, I am ready for whatever the players give me, feels more like the kind of DMing style than used to be, which when I was younger was very much a, here's my grand concept, archetype idea, bang, now you must do it. And it doesn't work. Players really, they do it for a bit, but if you want that long-running campaign that lasts for years and years and years and years, giving them a lot of freedom to do whatever they want and make the world around their choices, it makes for a world that they are invested in because they basically made it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, makes a big difference.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the first things you learn DMing, right? That people, if people wanted to read your story, like specifically just your story, you'd write it and sell it as a book.
I mean, yeah, no one reads books. Come on.
No, well, don't get me started on books.
The tragedy of the death of the author is now bigger and worse than it ever was. But go on.
It's not just a pile of authors, and upon their corpse, it's just Bob Iger from Disney weeing on all of them.
I mean, there's a literal lawsuit going on at the moment with the owners of various...
Yes!
I mean, it's Marvel. Of course it's Marvel, and I understand. Various Marvel creators going, hey, we ain't seen a penny. Or we have, but it's kind of... Our rights were bought out ages ago. Yeah. And there's a new copyright law that means you can claim for... Do you know about this? You can claim for past ownership if someone has now made a significant amount of product or money from it or something like that.
And it's a tragic story, this, because effectively Disney is saying, well, unfortunately, you were contracted, but every asset you made is art. It was Marvel's.
Yes, exactly.
But I guess that's the gamble you make when you freelance for another company rather than starting your own IP. But yeah.
But I think it is fair that this this copyright law now exists. The idea that you as a creator can go, yeah, I freelanced for that company and made that character over there. And I was paid for making that character over there who went on to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. But now the ball game has changed and you're still using the rules from 10, 20 years ago, which are now screwing over my descendants. That is a problem. Like I do, for example, like we contract players for all of our shows and we have an IP clause. And it doesn't say we own your IP now because that would be cruel. And we went to an IP lawyer and said, what should we do? And the IP lawyer said, just take the IP. And we went, I think you've missed the point. We're not here to steal people's IP. We're here to try and fairly equate IP between creators as in players and creators as in producers. And he just looked confused. The idea that you'd want to, he went, well, I suppose you could contractually stipulate that you don't own some of it. Why would you do that? And us going, because it's nice. Okay, fine, we'll do that. Like we can contractually.
You have a good lawyer, okay? But
I was very like it wasn't me. I didn't drive this one. Another one of our directors did. But the idea that we have a contract that says yes, we own some of your IP because we have to present it, but we don't own all of it. And if we go on to do things with it, or you go on to do things with it, let's equitably share out what's happening with it because. Without you creating it and us putting it on the internet, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think our contract technically breaks UK IP law because it divests. Because it's not supposed to. You're supposed to have contracts that say we take it, whereas our contract says we don't take it specifically. Like, I think we'd have an interesting discussion if we did have someone who contested it, but I don't know. But I think that's important. I think that's an important discussion to be having because we've changed from a world. Like, conceptually, you make a character for a stream that we run, which you have in a game that we're about to play on Monday, but
What?
I know. But you make a character for a game that we run, and you make it, we put it on the internet, and someone says, I love that character, Sam, we come play that character in this game over here. I think it's fair that we get a piece of that pie. You wouldn't have that character unless it was on our stream. But also, we don't own that character because you made it and put it on our stream because you freelanced for us, which is what Marvel is currently claiming. And it's worrying. I think it's extremely worrying, the idea that you can now go, someone made a character over there, freelanced over there, someone sold the rights over there, and now there's a multi-billion-dollar franchise and you're not involved. That seems wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's there's nothing more to articulate. You've articulated it perfectly.
Oh, sorry,
but it is.
I rambled.
It very much. This is really Disney's kind of thing, in that obviously their value is the assets they own.
Of course.
And I think you do have this huge problem, which then kind of like leaning back into D&D is that the character. The DM didn't make the character. The stream or the podcast didn't make the character, but the character would be valueless, effectively, without the platform that it's been placed on.
Yeah.
And so, it's sensible, and I would argue morally right, to, at the very least, share equity of IP and of these characters. Because Critical Role, right, is like, Pike, for example. We'll just choose a random character. We'll choose Pike Trickfoot. And it's like, Pike Trickfoot.
I mean, this isn't a question on the list, but I want to know, is Pike your favourite character? To make your point, then we'll talk Critical Role for a bit, because we never talk Critical Role on this channel, and we probably should, because we're all massive fans, and it's awesome. But yeah, go on. You first. Please. Let's take Pike. Let's take Pike together.
Yes, so we'll take Pike.
Interesting, because Critical Role just had a copyright issue that they've now resolved with they've got new IP regulation.
I haven't seen that. We will have to get into that in a second.
Oh, we will.
But I haven't seen that.
Finish your point first, and I'll tell you. It's fine.
So you have Pike Trickfoot, right? Yes. Who is effectively, first of all, wonderful character played by a wonderful person.
Yes.
But as wonderful as Ashley Johnson is, Pike as a character wouldn't be known without the platform that is Critical Role. And therefore, I would argue that Pike has been made by Ashley Johnson. Pike is Ashley Johnson's IP, but is valueless and unknown. It's without Critical Role. And therefore, the IP itself, no one knows it's your IP.
Because you've not shown it to anybody. Because
you've not shown it to anyone. And therefore, that's really the problem. And I think it's a kind of not uniquely D&D issue, but particularly an issue within D&D where you have these large streams and you have these large platforms that are effectively television shows.
Yes. And
you have performers within these shows who have embodied these characters, developed these characters. The arcs belong to the performers. But who owns that? Who owns that story? Because
I mean, Critical Role is a great example of this recent issue because they recently put out an IP statement, I mean, through Twitter, and then issues with presentation, but that's always been Critical Role's problem. Not meant harshly, but it's very, very hard as a company that socially connected to that many people to make a big public statement about the company's points because there's a certain personal element to it attached. Yeah. They had a point where they went, we're really sorry if you make a picture of our character and you sell a product based on that character, we need to be part of that conversation or you need to stop doing it, which is just IP regulation. I don't think they're wrong. I think they have a really, really good point about the difficulty of IP. The worry is that when they were smaller, they didn't set up their IP at that point, which now means they've created a very difficult dichotomy of, but I sell Critical Role mugs. I'm not involved in you at all, but you gave me the license to, basically, by saying, hey, make nice fan art and put it online.
Because it's free advertising, right?
Because it's free advertising, right?
Benefited from it, yeah.
It's a difficult one. It's a really, really tough one because unless you have IP regulations set up when you start asking for free art, which people don't, they never do, and why would you? It's never going to happen. But then when it does, you're suddenly in this terrible state of, who owns this? What do I do? And I totally understand that their lawyers, especially because they're working with Amazon, therefore the big corporation kicked in. And I mean, let's face it, this only started being a problem with Marvel when Disney kicked in. Like, it's the big corporation issue that IP is more valuable than anything else, ergo they will fight tooth and nail to protect it. So we're presenting your show, you've got to lock down your IP. I can see how that chain of events came to that point. I wonder if the main problem we got is that intellectual property, the concept of intellectual property, defines it as belonging to one person. And maybe that's a misnomer these days, the idea of intellectual property, because arguably, I own some of the intellectual property of the show's IDM for this channel, but arguably, some of the intellectual property is owned by the channel. And if I'm the DM on a show, some is owned by each player in that show as well. Therefore, we all need to share it, otherwise, which takes the idea of intellectual property and kind of demolishes it, because intellectual property can't be shared, technically, unless you contractually state that it is.
Yeah, and I think perhaps intellectual property is a hang-up from the era of the auteur.
Yeah.
In that, so you used to have films which were the sole product of one writer-director.
Yes.
And now everything is written by committee, effectively.
Yes.
So you look at the new James Bond. I haven't seen it yet. I will not spoil anything, but from what I've read, the only criticism anyone's really been able to point, I think Mark Kermode said this, is that you can feel that it was written by lots of people. It lacks the single vision of an auteur. And they've got amazing writers in there, Phoebe Waller-Bridge and some others who I don't know.
Neil Purvis and Andrew,
yes.
I think Andrew Wade, the guys who wrote Tomorrow Never Dies, which is, you know, not a fantastic film, but at least it plot-wise hangs together, which can't be said for a lot of recent Bond movies.
Yeah.
Like, what's the plot of Spectre? I couldn't tell you. I've seen it and I couldn't tell you.
James Bond wore a mask. At which point we can loop back to Critical Role. Good link. That's the one show level of link.
Hey, we're doing it.
But it's you because you lack this vision of a single auteur, which is the obvious. That's how D&D works.
Yes,
is that IP can't exist in that instance because it's a boiling pot.
It does exist,
well, yes.
Because in the TV land and in film land, a room full of writers is paid for their time, but the IP belongs to the studio. It has nothing to do with. If you wrote, Saturday Night Live's the obvious one. If you write a character for Saturday Night Live and it's associated with you because you perform it, it doesn't matter. It's theirs now because
Michaels,
because you own it now. Like it is it has been passed up the chain because. When you write something or create something freelance for someone else, the IP reverts to the person who paid you. The fact that American copyright law is now going, that might not be right, is great because it also starts to... we're in a way, you're right, D&D is on a bizarre cutting edge of this because it is automatically written by committee.
Yeah.
And that, I suppose, live improv in itself suits that. And then most of the big companies that set up out of it tend to be everyone who's involved in it is also a company director. Therefore, it doesn't matter because the IP of your thing is owned by all of you because you all own the company. Critical Role would have a terrible time if one of them said, I no longer want to be a company director. Because suddenly they don't own the IP of all of their characters anymore. which would be incredibly complicated.
Yeah, that is a problem I would leave to Travis Willingham to solve and not me.
Can we just agree that it's absolutely delightful that of all of them, the one who heads up the company, the CEO of the company, is Travis? Because Travis, people don't think of Travis as smart because of Grog, and actually Travis is really on it, really kind, really gentle, really like gently in charge of everything, and it just makes sense to me. When they said it was Travis as CEO, I went, yep, that makes perfect sense to me.
It makes sense to me, but I obviously, Marisha being creative director, my gut would say Marisha, you know, she knows everything that's going on, always in charge. But Travis, I think, is such a gentle giant. It's actually the wrong analogy to use, because he is, but he doesn't have that stereotype. A gentle giant, normally you think like Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
Who lacks the intellect to be anything but kind.
That is true, yes.
But I think Travis chooses to be kind, which Travis Willingham fan club here. But
that's fair. I'm a massive fan of Travis Willingham. I would say that loud and proud. He's a wonderful voice actor. I mean, because again, there's the kind of character that he tends to portray are the people like the Thors of this world in the Marvel Square Enix game. And in the TV show, I think, as well. But I'm not sure there. Or the characters from anime, the big bullish guys in the back who tend to be quite, slow-witted. He's given them all heart and character and soul before, so we know he's capable of that. And then he's like, Grog is a cookie-cutter D&D stereotype, and yet he's my favorite character that anyone's ever made as part of that show, because he's so realized. He's so truthfully honest with his own behavior. He ends the show going, I want to learn how to read, therefore he finds someone in the street and says, teach me to read, which makes perfect sense with an intelligence of 7. That's exactly what you should be doing. I agree with that statement. And it's also, and it will always be, an enduring love of himbos, thembos, chibos. They're just wonderful. Love them all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think. But yeah, I think knowing of Travis in this bizarre parasocial relationship I have with him.
Of course. The classic D&D problem. We're all parasocials, really.
I totally agree. I couldn't think of any of them who would be better, more sound of mind to manage the company.
Well, it also means that Matt can focus on what he's best at, which is the creative, which is perfectly right and should be the way. Marisha can focus on creative vision and direction, because she was doing that from the offset, and I think there's a certain amount of people didn't respect her enough on the internet, especially, to go that she's actually putting in the work. So showing that, letting the company show that directly by saying this is the job that we're doing and she's doing it, is correct. Like, that's how it should be, and I'm really glad she's doing that. And frankly, Laura's too busy, Ashley's too busy, Liam's too busy, and Sam's too busy. And Taliesin is off, starting cults. That's very important.
Exactly, right?
I mean, you can't be an ageless god and also be, working. That's not a thing that happens.
I've just got this vision now of like Yahweh sitting behind a desk, pushing pencils.
That's what Taliesin is. Hang on, I've got to do my admin. Multiversal tax return. Hang on a minute. I'm trying to remember what the himbo triangle is. Do you remember? Because it's swole. Swole is the first one. Not bright. Swole.
What's the triangle?
Kind. It's swole, dumb, and kind. That's it. It's swole, dumb, and kind. To be a perfect himbo or thembo or shibo or whatever you want to have, you've got to be big. Obviously, you've got to not be particularly bright, but you've also got to be kind. That's a very important part of that. Otherwise, because hang on, if you're swole and not very smart, you're Gaston, you're a jerk. And if you're swole and kind, but quite smart, then you're
this guy.
But yeah, there's different parts of the triangle that fit in different ways. Like the whole point is that you've got to have all of those to really fulfill that stereotype. It's true.
Yeah.
We should roll another dice. We've rambled beautifully, but
we have. I apologize. You've got half an hour out of one question.
No. The joy of this, I find, is that I am a rambler. I like to. My conversation rolls on, and when I find a fellow rambler, we just ramble forever. It's perfect. It's what we want, Sam. It's what we want.
This is actually a 7-day long, 24/7 stream now. There is no more roll together.
I forgot to start the timer, so we're going to finish at some point, and hopefully it fits the hour. Right, I've rolled another dice. Ooh, nat 20. Bam, 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 bam.
Beautiful.
Ooh. Which character was the hardest to say goodbye to?
Here's my curse.
You never play?
I never play.
No, same. I've been very lucky that I've now been able to play more recently, but up until we started the channel, I never played.
I only played in one game that lasted 4 sessions before I started DMing. The hardest character to say goodbye to.
I mean, could have been NPC that you had in a game that you were like, this NPC.
Yes,
like,
absolutely. I have a number of favorite NPCs, but my all-time favorite NPC was the human ranger Treg. Okay, Treg was wonderful. Treg. He was like, Treg. Hey, all right, my name's Treg. It was very Glaswegian, but Treg was wonderful. He was the guide, effectively, for the first campaign I ran that worked. Just for the first few sessions, get a few players in, help them learn to play. And if anything bad happened, Treg's only action was that he had a flying shield that could effectively increase the AC of any player who was risking getting downed. That was all Treg did. But Treg wasn't actually called Treg. Treg was 3 dwarfs called Greg in a trench coat.
Oh, God.
And the Treg's great reveal was that Treg slipped on some oil. And Treg's trench coat, or cloak rather, came undone, and you had these 3 very naked, very oiled up dwarfs sliding around on the floor like Danny DeVito when he's like, it's like, oh, I need to be clean, like covered in Purell.
You did it. You went there.
Treg was a hard one to say goodbye to because I would like to use Treg in every single game, but Treg came about before the 3 kobolds in a trench coat idea, like that appeared in, what was it, something of Rime of the Frost Maiden or whatever. Yep. But before that cover up bid, so Treg at the time, no one realised Treg was 3 Gregs in a trench coat. No, but now they just assume, and so the magic is lost. I think there was also. I think it's it's on Treg, because Treg is a really fun thing here. I think the concept of 3 people in a trench coat or 2 people in a trench coat is as old as comedy. Like, I think there is a certain amount of that. Like, the comedy pantomime horse has been a thing for years. Like, the idea of people hiding in things was such a thing. But I think D&D has now had its 3 kobolds in a trench coat moment, bizarrely, because it's just a piece of art in the book. There's no stat block. There's nothing. It's just 3 kobolds in a trench coat in one piece of art that never get mentioned as part of the story. And then people just really ran on it and loved it and started making trench coat characters. And, like, the 3 kobolds in a trench coat are now a playable character in Idle Champions. They're a playable character. They're called Hugh, H-E-W, Man, M-A-N. Because they're pretending to be human. Amazing.
And that's a joke from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Like, in the most bizarrest way in the world, 3 kobolds in a trench coat went from this is the best idea ever to the hackneyest idea ever over the course of a month. I don't know how it happened.
You're right when you say it's this ubiquitous kind of slapstick comedy trope.
Yeah.
And it is bizarre how it had its moment, and that's the problem. So Treg is on the Treg is on the dumpster pit that is all of the disgusting NPCs I've ever made. But the reason Treg was hard to say goodbye to was I thought Treg was a great idea, and Treg very quickly became a bad idea because everyone was doing it. Treg ceased to be original, regardless of Treg's Purell-coated God knows what. It was just a really difficult. Yeah, and I guess that's actually that kind of answers the question nicely. Is that's this weird thing where it became this shared cultural idea, a meme, if you will, for those of you who despise Richard Dawkins as much as I do.
Meme theory has developed. Ironically, meme theory has become a meme beyond Richard Dawkins.
We've won.
Yeah. Although we've technically stolen his IP.
But what comes next after this universally funny idea? 3 kobolds are weird. You'll sound a bit like this. And
all of your characters sound like that.
All of my characters.
In the same way that, come on, we all have fallback voices. DMs have fallback voices. Mine's always a bit cockney because it's an easy fallback voice to go, it's not me.
Yes, so I have guards a cockney because it sounds like the kind of bloke who'd punch you in the face at a pub.
Yeah.
Yeah, from experience. Then goblins and kobolds share the same voice. Occasionally, I'll intercalate some weird accent into it. So, you know from experience, like a southern drawl underneath a goblin voice, because it adds a little bit of flavour. But then there's that for goblins. And then I became obsessed at about the age of, God knows what, 14, which tells you how old I am now, with, 17, 16, something like that. No, it
doesn't. Oh, the example will, I see.
The example will, with The Last of Us, the year it came out. And so...
When you were good Lord.
17? When did it come out? 2013.
You know what? I don't
17.
want to think about it because it was out after I went to university.
Don't think about it. It wasn't that far off, sort of.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I loved Joel as a character, and because I played The Last of Us so much, I picked up this deep Texan voice that I was like, well, this is what orcs sound like now.
Oh, nice.
But some orcs are special, and some orcs have Australian accents because Australian accents are funny. So I have these few fullback accents. But before I went off on this rambly tangent, what do you think will be, or is at the minute, the new Three Kobolds in a Trench Coat?
At the moment, the thing everyone is engaging with a lot, being James Introcasso. He's a writer. Suddenly everyone's Twitter handle is that they are.
Oh, yes!
And I'm not quite sure why. I'm not that clocked into TTRPG Twitter because I don't... Bizarrely, for someone who spends a lot of their time on the internet, I don't spend a lot of time on the internet. I do streams and then I depart. It's a very specific line. Yeah, apparently everyone's James Introcasso these days, and I don't know why. I don't think that's good.
Maybe we should join in.
So, I don't think that's... I'm not that kind of
Maybe that's not how, maybe you have to be invited. It's like Clubhouse.
Maybe it's like Clubhouse. That's a very good point. Yeah. Also, I think we're English TTRPG Twitter, so we're even more removed. So I think it's... I don't know. Hang on. Feywild just came out. Feywild people are really enjoying, but there's not been that kind of like, this piece of art has grabbed us, or this concept has grabbed us in the same way. Like, we're all doing carnivals and game shows and fairgrounds.
We've been doing those for a while.
We have,
unless you haven't.
No, we have, because
since Critical Role Season 2, right? Basically, yeah.
It's not like anyone there knew it was coming. It's more of a... I think it's more of a sense of... I think that there are sort of concepts that travel through the sort of D&D multiverse sphere. Everyone does it a little bit at times. Yeah. But I don't think we've got quite that kind of aggressive, we've all seen this meme and we all love it now. I mean, Critical Role Season 3 starts in, a month? And whatever they do, I'm sure will be popular. Because...
Everywhere. Yeah.
Well, they're going to Marquette, so it'll probably be a bit more Middle Eastern. I mean, they already have a big enough problem with being very white. I really hope they take that carefully.
Yeah, well, I then won't say what I was going to say, but I was like, oh, well, I've got this idea at the minute where I feel like very few settings touch on the Middle East at all. But there's this really rich cultural history. Well, of course there's rich cultural history. It's it's not Ethiopia, but after humans leave Africa. I'm a biologist, evolutionary biologist. After humans leave Africa and then spread around the world, obviously the Middle East is the first place people end up. And it becomes this bed of...
Well, it was incredibly fertile.
Cultural growth.
It was an incredibly fertile because of the Euphrates. Yeah, it was a place where a lot of people could very quickly build and grow. I mean, I think the Euphrates... Damming the Euphrates in the Bitter Lake incident is what, 1940s?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah, because like...
It better be.
Something like that. No, it's pre-1940s because it's not. It's late 1940s because it's Eisenhower after the war, because Eisenhower did the big revitalization of America with Hoover Dam and all the rest of it. Yeah. And the Shah at the time saw it and went, "This is the best way to give to industrialize my country," and created. I mean, Bitter Lake is a thing. Bitter Lake is a huge dammed lake that was supposed to dam the Euphrates. It was supposed to bring energy and power to all of that part of the world, especially Iran. And it just stagnated growth. It's such a hot area that you needed water to function. And instead of working like the Nile does in Egypt, they cut it off. And suddenly millions of people were out of work, no farms, and out of food. And it created this incredible mess. One of the biggest messes in that part of the world is to do with American engineers telling them that we regretted it to damn the Euphrates.
Which may have been the plan the whole time. But
there is that argument, isn't there, that it was actually, like the Contras, it was a setup.
And you know, I'm not necessarily putting this forward as a conspiracy theory, but, you know.
You never know. You literally never know.
But the Fertile Crescent, the Mesopotamia, has this rich, like, folklore that isn't hugely explored. So we you know, there's English folklore makes its way into D&D a hell of a lot.
Of course it does.
You know, I was goblins, boggarts, all of these things are British inventions. European folklore, werewolves, vampires, elves. Irish folklore. And all of these things have found...
hang on. The transition of elves into the Irish folklore ideal comes from the Nordic ideal. Like, it was... Elves were Swedish, Norwegian, all the rest of it before they were Irish, definitely. Because Irish was Fomorians and... like all sorts of other names. Sorry, rambling. But yes.
No, I'm absolutely fine. But I was going to say the folklore of the Middle East, which is rich because people have been there for... We've had effectively 10,000 years of civilization.
Yes.
It just not really made its way into the cultural... I'm going to say lexicon, which is the wrong word, but
no, you're
which
correct.
Is funny
it hasn't
to use that word. But it hasn't. All of these ideas haven't made their way into the shared cultural consciousness, and they haven't made their way into D&D. But I think that actually season 3 is a good opportunity to start drawing some of those things into some of Matt's homebrew, and therefore...
Do you not feel to a certain extent like they shouldn't? Like, I feel like they shouldn't. I'm quite strong. Like, for example, do I feel like non-black players should play black characters? Honestly, no. Now, that's not because I don't think that you should.
Yeah.
I honestly feel like part of the whole point of this is that you can play things outside of yourself.
Yes.
It's because there will be a number of people who will be offended by it. Thus, it doesn't matter whether it is socially the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. If you're going to offend anybody by a choice, stop. It's not useful. Like, for example, there was an issue around one of the TTRPG streams, I can't remember which one. One of the players played a character who was darker skinned than themselves, and then in the artwork, the character suddenly got lightened out of being too dark because they were worried about it. And the debate that came out of this basically pitted a lot of black creators against each other, going, I think this is fine, I don't think this is fine. Like, why are we fighting each other? There was no need for that. Just, if you think that someone might be offended by a choice that you make, play it safe. There's no reason to dig the hole. And also, you're not the Crusader. Also, a particularly poor choice of words. But you shouldn't be. Like, do I want to create a setting with using a lot of Middle Eastern lore and narrative to create a different dialectic? I would love to, but then I'm appropriating. What I would love to do more than anything else is go to a creative who is Middle Eastern and say, I know there's a lot of this, and I'd love to have it in games. So that's my dog having a cough.
There you go. Happens to the best of us.
I'd love to have this in game.
Yeah.
You're all right.
All good?
Yeah, it's fun. Good. But
choking on a sock. Yeah.
No, he's got kennel cough at the moment, sadly. I can't put it in, and I shouldn't put it in. Can you, if I give you... I can give you platform. I've got loads of time for platform because I can give people the opportunity to DM on a stream.
Yeah.
If this is of interest to you, do you want to have a go at it? Because that's the way that you draw these things in. And even then, that's a little bit didactic from I have a platform, but I do. The ability to go, this is your story to tell. If you want to tell it and you're interested in it, there's a space for it. Also, if you want to tell a story that has nothing to do with it, be my guest. Because again, I think we should be extremely cautious around, especially appropriation now.
Yeah.
Where I would have said 10 years ago, appropriation, a positive appropriation is good because it highlights things that the other people don't know about. I would now go, you know what? There's so many fantastic creators who aren't white. Let's give them all the opportunity, if we can, or stay the fuck out of the way. Because that's also a thing. I agree with you. What a wonderful area to mine and explore. I don't think it's for us. You can disagree with me. That's how I feel.
I think it would... I think, and this can open up another topic for discussion, but I think it's D&D, as an example, just any TTRPG, I think is a good opportunity for education. I think, but based on the historical influence of the stories, the folklore, the famous characters that have influenced the ideas that were kind of the foundation of D&D. Even looking at the ideas that have kind of influenced Tolkien. Anyway,
sure.
it means that it's a rich vein for understanding the cultural histories of the countries which have kind of borne these ideas. And I think that D&D would benefit from long-term, and it doesn't matter, well, it does matter who writes it, but what I'm saying when I say it doesn't matter who writes it, as long as it's in there, and as long as you've got the right people to write it. So, for example, if you're talking about the Middle East, you've got people who have kind of actually understand the cultural heritage.
But we're starting to get this now. Like the Domains of Dread in the Ravenloft book, there's a Chinese-themed Domain of Dread, and there's an Egyptian-themed Domain of Dread. And I believe, again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm 90% sure that the writers for those sections are not white and were brought in specifically so they could make sections that were specifically not around this area. Candlekeep Mysteries is another one where a lot of the mysteries are not classic stories that a white person would tell, with influences from lots of different world settings that were written by people from those world settings. So we are building those in, because now, I mean, this is where I think this is gorgeous. There's now a published adventure, which is it's a one-shot adventure as part of Candlekeep, which you can run as a full campaign, and I thoroughly recommend it. It's gorgeous because it does all lock together and it's quite nice. I, as a DM, white, I mean, not cisgendered, but that's a different topic, could easily run that, use all of the language and terminology and things that are used within it, and go, I didn't write this. I am not appropriating this and going, this is mine. I'm going, someone else wrote this, I wish to present it. Would I present it online? Probably not. It's not really my place to. But in a home game environment, I now have the tools to talk to other players about these wonderful worlds that exist out there, which means that every DM in the world has those now if they want them. I think that's the step, you know?
Absolutely. And everyone has the opportunity to sit there and read it, and through reading these stories, understand world history that they wouldn't encounter otherwise. And I think that is a fundamentally powerful thing that D&D can do. And I think it's something that in the long term needs to be part of the vision of Wizards, that this is effectively a way to tell these stories that don't get spoken about in the West. And I think, and that's exactly it, that there's this rich vein of folklore around the world, and that's kind of shaped what every culture is. You know, most of our behaviors, religious, psychological, cultural, are a result of, at some point, folklore. And it's bizarre that this game that we're now playing that is spinning off into a film and spun off into all of these video games. I mean, this is all a medium. Before. It has all happened before.
Lest we forget, third edition, 3.5, 4 less so. They started publishing Oriental Adventures, terrible and titled these days, obviously racially terrible, and not written by any people of that race. So that's clearly problematic in and of itself. They had Mastica. They tried to expand the settings, but they did it in the way that we're currently talking about, of going, I think this would be a good story to tell. I think these stories are cool. It's not your story to tell.
No, absolutely.
So the more that these settings get picked up again by writers who want to fit those pieces together, that's my son playing with my dog. The more that these... Ivo, I'm in the middle of a recording, darling. Okay. Thanks, Bear. The idea that these settings already exist, problematically exist. All it would take is one or two creatives to go, you did some groundwork that we need to rewrite, but at the heart and soul of this is, how do I get some of this culture's folklore into my D&D, and I can help you do that. I think that's what we're heading towards. I think that I hope that happens sooner rather than later, because you're right, there are some wonderful folklore pieces from around the world that we don't touch on enough that are really cool for storytelling. There's a ghost in... I'm gonna find it. I know we're doing an interview. I don't care. I'm gonna find it. There's a type of ghost that I can't remember the name of that came from Van Richten's guide, which is a specifically, I believe, Chinese ghost. What was it called? Do you remember? No.
I haven't read Van Richten's guide. I bought it purely so I could play a Dampire a few weeks ago. Because I needed it on D&D Beyond, and because I had the chance to play Alucard basically Alucard. I was
I mean, everyone played Alucard. Everyone played Alucard. I didn't. No, I made a Reborn. They're gorgeous.
Ooh.
They're great. I have wanted to play the Undead, I don't know why I just do, for ages, in so many different guises. And I mean, this segues very nicely. I'm about to play an Undead in your campaign, Sam.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you talk about that while I find the monster?
Why don't I? Yeah. While you're having a look, yes, you are, which hopefully, fingers crossed, everything works. Who knows? Will be starting on the Friday before Halloween. Aptly. Cosmic horror anthology, basically, of groups of 4-part adventures, each of which has a completely unique cast, to basically fill out the lore of the world I started in my podcast, Live, Laugh, Lovecraft, which was a joy to make, and this will continue to be a joy to make. But yes, you are playing a Reborn who is kept alive by their magical suit of armor.
Correct, yes.
Golden.
Well, okay. I already love Iron Man concepts, as may have come up in this interview. And I love the idea that an artificer wants to improve themselves, and the idea of improving yourself with body modifications, that sort of thing. I thought, instead of going that way, what if the armor is the improvement? I'm going to wear this, and in doing so, I will become like... And then I had in my head suddenly a sort of classic chivalrous background. My sibling is a noble knight, and everyone's really strong and doing all the things, and I can't do the things, so I'm going to make a suit so I can do the things. But how do you power the suit? Oh, I'll use my life force. That can't be problematic, right? Wrong. Killed you. But you're still alive, sort of, in the suit, but you can't leave it.
So here's the thing. Is it that you're playing the Reborn, or are you playing the suit? I'm sure we'll find that out. That would be a spoiler.
No, I have a contextual thought on this, because there are abilities within artificers that allow you to have things come out of the suit at various points. Yeah. I'm thinking that there will be an element of it that will be... I am uniquely the creature inside and part of the suit. It is all me, effectively. Yeah. But that there will come points when I go, hang on, what if I just discard the body? It's kind of useless now. And then get to a point of, do I actually have a corpus anymore? What does it mean? That could be quite fun.
That'd be really deeply philosophical.
Is this hand
that's
my
what
hand?
I like. Yeah.
I mean, we're only doing 4 episodes. I doubt we'll get to that level, but
we'll bring you back sometime if you'd like.
Or do I want to be brought back? Interesting conundrum. I'm not sure if I do. I don't know. In character, I have no idea.
That's the thing, right?
Yeah.
But I think, well, briefly then, I guess linking philosophy to this idea of D&D as a teaching tool. Obviously, the name of the podcast originally was Live, Laugh, Lovecraft, was based around Lovecraftian cosmic horror.
Sure.
And the goal of the podcast, less so these series, but they still touch on the same ideas, because they are ideas that kind of permeate throughout the entirety of Lovecraftian horror as a genre, were nested within 20th century science, which I did my undergraduate thesis. I used machine learning to basically study how ideas spread and who was responsible for them. And guess what? The largest ideas which have shaped science as it is today were the product of one Ronald Fisher, and Ronald Fisher was the chap who effectively invented eugenics.
Yeah.
And so effectively the podcast came about as a means to explore how 20th century science affected society and culture. And Lovecraftian horror ended up the perfect medium for that, because Lovecraft also held the same views that these academics in the 20th century did. Absolutely wrongly, of course. There is no scientific merit to any of them. They are disgusting. And anyone who would at any point attempt to use IQ studies to justify treating anyone differently to anyone else, or whatever other studies they want to make up, is a despicable human being who frankly deserves no right to partake in any conversations, any meaningful conversations. But yeah, you kind of had this overlap between these problematic ideas and someone who fundamentally believed them, and which is kind of then enjoyable that you are using Lovecraft's work to deconstruct his own ideas.
I mean, you've heard the joke, surely, that if Gary Gygax were alive, he'd hate what D&D would have become, and that's good.
Yeah.
Like, that is a positive thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it is no longer a war game. It is no longer a move minis around a map game. It has much more to it than that. Yeah, I think there is a really interesting, like the fact that it's called Live, Laugh, Lovecraft is unfortunate because you're still promoting Lovecraft in context. But
yeah, so it is called Live, Laugh, Lovecraft. It will not be called Live, Laugh, Lovecraft. This is to be publicized soon. Because
the thing is, I also think it's important as part of creating podcasts and concepts and ideas. The idea of going, I want to make a point about this, and going, I've made that point. I can't keep making that point. Like, that is perfectly valid as part. Like, I find one of the lovely things about running shows that have finite end times, that we only run for 12, 4, 8 episodes, whatever, means that you can't create the rambly campaign that goes on forever. You have to find ways of tying arcs up, because if you don't tie them up, they will just fester and linger, and that's not the point. Especially when it comes to ideas, the idea of tying an idea up, of going, I've made this point now, it is finite and complete. Also, that I think it's important to note as part of this that the ideas of eugenics are a 18th to 19th century invention that then became prevalent throughout most of the 20th century.
As a result of the discovery of genetics was the issue. Yeah. Effectively, it was here is the tool we can use to enact or understand this cultural idea or this pseudoscientific idea that had been put forward 100 years earlier. Yeah.
But it is important to state, and again, I will reinforce your point, eugenics is wrong, terrible, awful. It has been used by successive governments, by successive organizations and groups throughout most of the 20th century to justify a shit ton of terrible behavior. Like,
many of which are not as well known as you would hope they would be.
I mean, there's some that came from a very sort of good place, but ended up in, like, my parents met as part of Mensa. Mensa is an organization that was specifically designed to have smart people have children with other smart people, so they make more smart people. It doesn't work because that's not how smartness works, but we don't really understand how it works either, so it's kind of pointless. Like, going even, like, there was the babies in New York where there were triplets who were all separated at birth to test eugenics, to see if nature or nurture brought them up. They weren't told. No one told them that they were being separated at birth. They discovered it 40 years later. One of them killed himself. Yeah, like, I'm not sure if that's necessarily intimately linked, but there's a documentary on Netflix that says it certainly is. Netflix, but
it's a documentary on Netflix. Yeah.
But I think it is worth thinking about Lovecraft and eugenics contextually as this defined the 20th century in many
absolutely. All ways. Academic discourse in the 20th century was at a fundamental level about that. You could not find a single member of the political or academic establishment who did not at least think that these thoughts had merit. They might have thought they were wrong, but they probably wouldn't have denied that they were potentially academically rigorous.
I mean, I would argue, we're getting really into the weeds here, but I'd argue that a lot of conservative thinking in US, UK, and other countries as well is primarily based in the idea of privilege over right. Like the current American argument about all of their voter suppression laws, and they are voter suppression laws. If you're American and think they aren't, we can debate this another time, but they fucking are. The idea that someone is there going, voting is a privilege.
Yeah.
No, it isn't. And life is not a privilege. Like But that is eugenics think. This idea that some things are better than others, some things are more worthy than others, and therefore worth giving more license to, and making it a privilege over a right, which is slowly starting to be unpicked. But it's been such a dramatic part of all of our parents' upbringings, and to a certain extent ours. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and scarily so. I think there was a paper which came out last week. Tangential, but loosely related. We're now.
Scientific paper. My God.
Didn't think we'd get here. There was a paper that came out a couple of weeks ago, which basically said babies born during the pandemic have an average IQ of something like 78. I think the normal, as when I say the normal distribution, so the distribution of IQs, the normal average is 100. So they're basically saying babies born during the pandemic are, however many, deviate, effectively less intelligent than normal babies. Now, first of all, how the hell do you work out how intelligent a baby is? Let's not get into that. That's a very long discussion.
IQ's been completely debunked as a way of measuring.
Exactly. IQ has also been completely debunked. Now, there is a point to this, and that's that, yes, we will need to provide more care potentially to these children because they haven't had the socialization that they probably needed during their first year. But why did that get published? Why was there a BBC News article about it when we have done so much already to unpick IQ as a means of determining intelligence?
Because it was written by an intelligent journalist who is probably in his 40s. I'm sorry, I'm assuming.
And has an IQ of 145. Did you know I have an IQ of 140?
I mean, that's what they're getting into the problem with the political and the journalistic establishment, is that they are basically crewed by people. I mean, so I'm going to say it, and you might disagree with this, I think it's fair, like you and me. They are crewed by people who were raised upper mid, if not more than that, educated well, went to the right universities, went to the right schools, all the rest of it, all white, obviously. And the principle there being that we have an authority and a privilege to talk about these things that should matter to everyone, when you boil it down, they don't. And, I mean, again, I'm going to use voter suppression as an example because it's a good one. A lot of people in the US are really angry about it. For obvious reasons, their vote is being suppressed. And yet politicians go, no, it's important because it feels like we can't trust voting anymore. The only reason it feels like you can't trust voting anymore is because you've been telling people, or your party has been telling people for years, that you can't trust voting anymore because you keep losing elections.
So the only reason you can't trust voting anymore is because they're not voting for you.
And that's part of the problem. Like, you know, we got back to Donald Trump. It's not a good sign to tie things up, but I think it's a good end point. Donald Trump, you lost an election. That means the election was false. Or people don't like you.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Maybe you lost an election because people don't like you. No, you've decided that therefore the election is false because you cannot conceive of a world where your narcissistic personality wasn't loved by everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my favourite Critical Role character is Not the Brave.
we haven't talked about Not the Brave, and I have such serious issues with Not the Brave.
Veth, don't care for any other character. Why do I like Not? Why do I like Not? Very simple answer.
Funny voice. I played a kobold for 12 episodes, and I warned everyone I was going to do a kobold voice, and it became that one! I did that the whole way through, and so high-pitched! It was the whole way through! And, people...
Your dog's kennel cough is my kobold. The only thing that distinguishes kobold from goblin is the fact that kobolds cough up fur balls as they're talking.
Yes, sir. Master.
That's just a golem cough. That is a golem cough. Don't lie. I know what it is.
What is your pieces? Is it soft? Juicy?
Let's wrap it up. I looked up that ghost, by the way, and it's called Yang. I'm probably going to butcher this. Yangshi.
Okay.
And it is specifically it's based on Yangshi is a kind of Chinese ghost, and it has abilities that have nothing to do with how we might conceive of ghosts. It fears its own reflection.
Oh wow.
Stuff like that, like just again, really nice sort of like tiny little like elements.
A Chinese hopping vampire.
Yeah, rigor mortis notoriously affects the limbs of the Yangshi, causing them to hold their arms rigidly to walk with a stiff gait. This, along with their flight, is meant to call them hopping vampires. That's again fascinating. The kind of thing that would never come into Western mindset thinking of how to run a character, but is now part of the game and part of what anyone can do in the game because a writer who is from that world. From that part of that culture, decided to put it in. That's amazing. But
it's amazing, and I hope 5.5e or 6e or whatever they end up calling it. God knows. Maybe we'll just skip 6. We'll just go to 13. Unlucky, right? It's been one of those years.
The rumor I've heard is they're going to stop using numbers, which seems wise.
Probably sensible, because there comes a point where Dungeons and Dragons Improv Edition.
Well, this was the point of advanced D&D than the original, but yeah.
I love AD&D. I managed to find some old books in an Oxfam. I got very excited. I was scrolling
There's a
through.
clown in Witchlight called Thaco, and that to me says it all.
Thaco the clown.
Correct. Because Thaco is so dumb.
Let's just hope that I think the next edition, whatever it may be called, kind of takes some of the ideas that they've been trialing over the last couple of years and expands on them. It just goes like, let's bring in more stuff written by creators who it's in their cultural heritage or their background or stuff they studied, they know about it. And let's just make this a more accessible, more, I was going to say broad church, but that's normally used negatively. You know what I'm trying to say? Effectively, that we can have this game that allows people to tell the stories they want to tell, regardless of where they're from. not just tell people the stories they want to tell if they're from America or Western Europe.
And for a final bit of politics, and let's pay them properly, not screw them over as employees, make sure they're well treated and looked after so they don't write long tweets about how working for you is shit.
Nah.
Anyway, that's what we've got time for.
Yes.
Sam, you've already plugged. Well, tell us what the show's called and tell us where we can watch it.
I can do. So you can listen to the back catalogue of Live, Laugh, Lovecraft wherever your podcasts live. I would say Apple Podcasts and give it a review while you're there. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at LovecraftDND. Or from Friday, the 29th of October, you will be able to see myself and Chris's lovely face over on Check These Out's Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/checktheseout.
Big props to Check These Out, members of our stream team. That's very nice. Head to twitch.tv/team/rolling together. And there's TTRPG content most days. There's lovely things to catch up on, and we all host each other, so you can check out everything. Yeah, it's very much worth checking out. Can recommend. Speaking of creatives who aren't necessarily all white and live in America and Europe, we have a lot of lovely Asian streamers as well. But yes, do check it out. As to Roll Together, we are, we stream on Mondays and Tuesdays at 6 p.m. GMT, BST, depending on time zones, and we're nearing a point where they cross over. So that means that on Mondays, we're currently streaming The Eternal Army, which is run by Nal Ishak, which is... he's not revealed that much yet, so I won't reveal that much yet. But it's an exciting adventure with more to come, and you should check that one out. They're taking a break this coming Monday. We have jumped in with a one-shot. We're doing Busy Bees, which is our sort of animated animals, awakened animals. We're doing another one-shot. It's a beach episode. Sam plays in it as well. So come join us and check out Busy Bees on Monday. That's 6 p.m. GMT BST. And on Tuesdays, we're currently streaming Warriors of Waterdeep, the Dragon of Harvest Shield Mountain, which is our actual play D&D game based on the popular mobile game Warriors of Waterdeep. So who also sponsor the show. Thank you very much. So yes, do check both of those out this week. We also stream Talk Together on Saturdays, which normally runs for an hour, but I think pretty sure we're over. Everything
we're just about good. I think we're just good.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
We started it. Yeah, we should be all right.
Interesting.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens in the edit. Yeah. So everything streams at twitch.tv/rolltogetherrpg. There's a YouTube link in chat, which is youtube.com/rolltogetherrpg if you fancy looking at archive material. And again, as Sam put, we're everywhere you find podcasts. And if you don't find us there, let us know so we can make sure you do find us there. Podcasts tend to proliferate. But yes, massive thank you to our D20 Club on Patreon, all of our sponsors and supporters, and as Dave, who started this show, likes to say, stay classy at the table.